I watched my father Gerald dismiss the woman I loved to a crowd of wedding guests, his voice dripping with condescension as he gestured toward Sarah. "She's just a security guard," he announced with that familiar laugh that made my stomach clench. "Some people settle for minimum wage jobs, I suppose." The elegant country club reception fell silent for a heartbeat before polite chuckles rippled through the crowd of corporate executives and their wives. Sarah's face remained composed, but I saw the flash of hurt in her eyes. Gerald had no idea that in 24 hours, everything would change forever. The humiliation at my cousin Marcus's wedding reception wasn't new. It was the latest chapter in a lifelong story of disappointment that my father had been writing since I chose my own path instead of following his corporate blueprint. Growing up in Gerald Turner's house meant living under the constant pressure of achievement. Not just any achievement, though. It had to be the right kind of achievement. The kind that impressed other executives at his investment firm. The kind that came with corner offices, six-figure salaries, and the ability to look down on people who worked with their hands or wore uniforms. When I enlisted in the Army after high school, Gerald tolerated it as a stepping stone to something better. Military experience looks good on business school applications, he'd tell his golf partners. But when I came home from 2 tours in Afghanistan and chose to work in private security, instead of pursuing his vision of corporate success, the disappointment became a weapon he wielded with surgical precision. "You're throwing your life away protecting shopping malls," he'd say whenever I tried to explain that security work meant something to me. That after seeing real violence overseas, I wanted to use my training to keep ordinary Americans safe in their everyday lives. That there was honor in being the person others could count on when danger threatened. Sarah entered my life 6 months ago when our security companies coordinated on a joint training exercise. She supervised security operations at Regional Medical Center, one of the largest hospitals in the state. While I protected corporate buildings and retail establishments, she literally stood between chaos and the people fighting for their lives in emergency rooms and intensive care units. She'd prevented 3 potential violence incidents in the past year alone, including stopping an armed man from reaching the pediatric ward. But when Gerald met her at a family barbecue, all he saw was a uniform and a job title that didn't impress his social circle. "Security guard," he'd muttered to my Uncle Robert that day, as if the words tasted bitter. "My son's dating a security guard." Tonight at the wedding reception, surrounded by Marcus's new in-laws with their old money and country club connections, Gerald saw his opportunity to distance himself from what he considered my poor life choices. The country club's crystal chandeliers cast elegant light over tables adorned with white roses and gold accents. Women in designer gowns sipped champagne, while men in custom-tailored suits discussed stock portfolios and real estate investments. This was Gerald's natural habitat, where success was measured in dollars and status symbols. Sarah looked beautiful in her navy dress, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo. She'd saved for 2 months to buy that dress, wanting to make a good impression on my extended family. She held herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced real challenges and emerged stronger. But Gerald couldn't see past his own prejudices. "Roderick works in security too," he announced to a circle of wedding guests, his voice carrying that particular tone that meant trouble was coming. "Some people are content with simple jobs. Not everyone can handle the pressures of real business." The group turned to look at us with polite interest tinged with pity. These people judged worth by quarterly earnings reports and vacation home locations. In their world, anyone who wore a uniform to work was invisible, unless they needed directions to the bathroom. "Security work must be very different from what you do, Gerald," commented Mrs. Harrison, Marcus's new mother-in-law. Her diamond necklace probably cost more than Sarah made in 6 months. "Completely different," Gerald agreed, warming to his audience. "I negotiate million-dollar deals, handle complex financial instruments. My son stands around making sure teenagers don't shoplift." Each word was calculated to hurt, designed to make me feel small in front of these people whose opinions Gerald valued more than his own son's dignity. Sarah's hand found mine under the table, her fingers squeezing gently. She understood what this meant to me, how deeply my father's disapproval cut. "Sarah here supervises hospital security," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. She protects patients and medical staff. Hospital security, Gerald repeated with a dismissive wave of his champagne glass. Still security. Still uniform work. Still not what I hoped for my son's future. The conversation moved on to safer topics like golf handicaps and stock market predictions, but the damage was done. Sarah and I sat through the rest of the reception in tense silence, watching my father hold court with people who measured human worth by bank account balances. As the evening wound down, Uncle Robert approached our table with an apologetic expression. "Don't take it personally," he said quietly. "You know how Gerald gets around these people. He just wants to fit in, but I knew better. This wasn't about fitting in. This was about control. Gerald couldn't accept that his son had chosen a path that didn't validate his own life choices. He needed me to fail so he could be proven right about the importance of chasing money and status above all else." We left early, walking to my car in silence while laughter and music drifted from the country club's windows. Sarah finally spoke as I started the engine. "He's never going to accept me, is he?" she asked, staring out at the perfectly manicured golf course. I wanted to reassure her, to promise that my father would come around once he got to know her better. But I'd been hoping for Gerald's acceptance my entire adult life, and tonight had shown me just how futile that hope really was. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know this. I'm not ashamed of what we do. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of you." As we drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I had no idea that my father's campaign against our relationship was just beginning, or that within 24 hours, the whole world would see the true value of the work Gerald considered beneath his notice. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. Sarah and I sat at my kitchen table, picking at scrambled eggs, while the previous night's humiliation replayed in our minds like a bad movie we couldn't turn off. "Maybe he's right," Sarah said suddenly, setting down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "Maybe I should look for something else, something more respectable." The defeat in her voice hit me harder than any of Gerald's insults. Sarah Chen was one of the toughest people I knew. She'd talked down violent psychiatric patients, coordinated emergency responses during a hospital shooting threat, and personally intervened when a gang member tried to attack a rival in the emergency room. Seeing her doubt herself because of my father's social prejudices made my anger crystallize into something cold and sharp. "You save lives," I said firmly. "Last month you stopped that drunk driver from crashing into the ambulance bay. 3 weeks ago you caught that guy trying to steal prescription drugs from the pharmacy. You think that's not respectable?" She managed a weak smile. "Your father would say anyone can spot a shoplifter." Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Frank Morrison, my supervisor at Pinnacle Corporate Security. Frank never called on Sundays unless something was seriously wrong. "Roderick, we need to talk." Frank's gravelly voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "Got some interesting phone calls yesterday about your workplace relationships." My blood went cold. "What kind of phone calls?" "The kind that question your professionalism. The kind that suggest you're too emotionally involved with someone in the security field to maintain proper judgment. The kind that make me wonder if there's something going on I should know about." Sarah was watching my face, and I saw understanding dawn in her eyes. "Gerald." It had to be Gerald. "Frank, I can explain. Conference room tomorrow morning, 8 sharp. Bring your incident reports from the past 6 months. We need to review your conduct." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, fury building like pressure in a boiler. Gerald had gone too far. Sarah's voice was quiet, but steady. "He called your boss." It wasn't a question. We both knew Gerald's methods well enough by now. When charm and manipulation failed, he escalated to direct interference. My hands shook as I dialed Gerald's number. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice before he even spoke. "Roderick, I was wondering when you'd call. What did you tell Frank Morrison?" "Only the truth. That my son is making poor decisions that affect his professional judgment. That he's romantically involved with someone who could compromise his effectiveness. That he needs guidance from his supervisor to get back on track." "You hadn't a right." "I had every right. I'm your father. I won't stand by and watch you destroy your future for some misguided infatuation." The word infatuation hit like a slap. Gerald couldn't even acknowledge that what Sarah and I had was real love, built on mutual respect and shared values. "This stops now," I said through gritted teeth. "Actually, this is just the beginning." Gerald's voice turned harder, more businesslike. "I've been thinking about your situation all night. You have a choice to make, son. A simple choice that will determine your entire future. I'm listening. Break up with this security guard. Pursue proper employment in finance or business management. Accept my help getting established in a respectable career. Do this, and you'll have my full support. Financial assistance, professional connections, everything you need to succeed. And if I don't, then you're on your own, completely on your own. No more rent money for that apartment I've been paying for. No more family gatherings. No more relationship with me at all. And definitely no inheritance when I'm gone." The words hit like physical blows. Gerald had been subsidizing my apartment rent for the past year, claiming it was temporary help while I established myself professionally. I'd thought it was fatherly support. Now I realized it was a leash, giving him leverage to control my choices. Sarah had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. Her face had gone pale, but her spine straightened with resolve. "You're using money to manipulate your own son," I said into the phone. "I'm using every resource at my disposal to save my son from making the biggest mistake of his life. You have 24 hours to decide. Choose your career and your family, or choose this woman and lose everything else." Gerald, 24 hours. Roderick. Don't make me wait longer than that. He hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. "He's serious," she said softly. "Dead serious. He's been planning this." I rubbed my eyes, feeling suddenly exhausted. The apartment, the interference with Frank, probably other things I don't even know about yet. "What are you going to do?" I looked at her, this incredible woman who'd chosen to dedicate her life to protecting others, who'd never asked for anything more than honesty and loyalty from me. The choice Gerald thought was difficult was actually the easiest decision I'd ever made. "I'm going to prove him wrong," I said. "About you, about me, about the value of what we do." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Even if it means losing your family? If standing up for us means losing them, then they were never really family to begin with." But even as I said the words, I felt the weight of what Gerald was asking me to sacrifice. Uncle Robert, Cousin Marcus, the extended family I'd grown up with at holiday gatherings and summer barbecues. Gerald's influence ran deep through our family structure, and his version of events would become the accepted truth for most of our relatives. The next morning would bring my meeting with Frank Morrison, where I'd have to defend my professionalism against Gerald's manipulation. It would be the beginning of a battle I wasn't sure I could win. But as I watched Sarah clear the breakfast dishes with quiet dignity, I knew I'd rather fight and lose than surrender the best thing that had ever happened to me. Gerald had given me 24 hours to choose between love and family approval. He'd assumed that was enough time for fear to override principle. He was about to discover how wrong he could be. Monday morning brought the meeting I'd been dreading. Frank Morrison's office at Pinnacle Corporate Security felt smaller than usual as I sat across from his massive oak desk, my employment file spread between us like evidence at a trial. Frank was a good man, a retired police detective who'd hired me 3 years ago based on my military record and recommendations from former commanding officers. He'd always been fair, always listened before making judgments. But Gerald's phone call had clearly planted seeds of doubt. "Your performance reviews have been exemplary," Frank said, flipping through pages of incident reports and supervisor evaluations. "No complaints from clients, no problems with punctuality or protocol adherence." "Thank you, sir. But this phone call I received raises concerns about your objectivity. Your father suggests that your relationship with Sarah Chen might compromise your professional judgment." I chose my words carefully. "Sir, Sarah, and I work for different companies at different locations. Our personal relationship has never interfered with my duties here." Frank studied me for a long moment. Your father was quite specific about his concerns. He believes you're becoming too emotionally invested in security work itself, that you're treating it as a career, instead of a stepping stone to something better. The manipulation was subtle but effective. Gerald had framed his objections as concern for my advancement, rather than simple snobbery. He'd made himself sound like a caring parent worried about his son's limited ambitions. Sir, I consider security work a legitimate profession, one that serves an important purpose, and I agree. But your father painted a picture of someone who might be losing perspective, someone who might need guidance from his supervisor to stay focused. Frank closed the file and leaned back in his chair. I'm not taking any action based on one phone call, Roderick. But I want you to know that outside interference in workplace matters concerns me. If there are problems in your personal life that might affect your job performance, I need to know about them. There won't be any problems, sir. But even as I said it, I wondered if that was true. Gerald's reach extended further than I'd realized, and his willingness to involve my employer showed he was escalating beyond family pressure tactics. The rest of my shift passed normally. I monitored security cameras, conducted floor patrols, and checked identification badges at the executive elevator bank. The corporate plaza housed 3 major companies and a high-end retail complex, requiring constant vigilance against both criminal activity and simple safety hazards. Around lunchtime, my phone started buzzing with texts from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. Uncle Robert, heard you're having some problems. Call me. Cousin Jennifer, Dad says you and Gerald are fighting about your girlfriend? What's going on? Aunt Patricia, your father is worried about you. Maybe we should talk. Each message felt like another piece of solid ground crumbling beneath my feet. Gerald had been busy, spreading his version of events through our extended family network. By the time his narrative took hold, I'd be painted as the troubled son who'd chosen an inappropriate woman over family wisdom. I called Uncle Robert during my break, hoping to find at least one ally in the family chaos. Roderick, thank God you called back. Robert's voice carried genuine concern mixed with confusion. Gerald says you're going through some kind of crisis, that this woman you're dating is encouraging you to reject family guidance. Uncle Robert, that's not what's happening. He's worried about you, son. Says you're talking about security work like it's some kind of calling instead of temporary employment. Says this girlfriend is filling your head with ideas about making a career out of minimum wage jobs. The lies were subtle but pervasive. Gerald had twisted my commitment to meaningful work into evidence of instability. He'd portrayed Sarah as a negative influence, rather than acknowledging her as a dedicated professional. Has Gerald told you what Sarah actually does? I asked. Security guard at some hospital. Look, I'm not judging anyone's honest work, but Gerald has a point about planning for the future. You're a smart young man with military training. You could do anything. I am doing something. Something important. Roderick. Robert's sigh carried the weight of family loyalty divided by genuine affection. Gerald asked me to talk sense into you. He says you have until tonight to make some decisions about your direction. After the call ended, I sat in my security office staring at the bank of monitors, showing peaceful afternoon activity throughout the corporate plaza. Executives hurried between meetings, retail workers restocked merchandise, maintenance crews cleaned common areas. All of it required protection, coordination, and vigilance to maintain safety and order. Gerald saw uniformed work as beneath notice, but someone had to stand watch. Someone had to be ready when ordinary days turned dangerous. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Hospital administration called me in for a meeting about external concerns regarding my professionalism. Someone contacted them about my personal relationships affecting my judgment. Gerald's campaign was expanding beyond me to target Sarah directly. He was systematically attacking both of our professional reputations, trying to force us apart by making our jobs untenable. As afternoon shifted toward evening, I received a call that would change everything, though I didn't recognize its significance at the time. Roderick, this is Detective Maria Santos with Metro Police. We've worked together on a few incidents at your location. Maria was a 15-year veteran of the force who'd coordinated with our security team during several investigations. She was professional, competent, and one of the few law enforcement officers who understood the value of good private security. Detective Santos, what can I do for you? I wanted to give you a heads up about some unusual activity we've been monitoring in the downtown area. Nothing concrete yet, but we've had reports of suspicious individuals conducting surveillance on several major buildings, including your corporate plaza. What kind of surveillance? Taking photographs, timing security rotations, mapping entrance and exit points. Could be nothing. Could be something more serious. Just wanted you to be extra vigilant over the next few days. Understood. I'll brief my team and review our protocols. Thanks, Roderick. You guys do good work over there. It's helpful having professional security we can count on. After she hung up, I updated our incident logs and sent alerts to the other security officers. It felt good to focus on real work instead of Gerald's manipulations. To be reminded that what I did mattered beyond family politics and social status. But even as I conducted extra patrols that evening, checking for signs of suspicious activity, I couldn't escape the reality of my situation. Gerald's ultimatum deadline was approaching, and he'd already proven willing to attack both Sarah's job and mine. Tomorrow would bring consequences I couldn't yet imagine, but I was certain of one thing. I wouldn't abandon the woman I loved or apologize for choosing meaningful work over social approval. Gerald wanted to force me into submission through economic pressure and family manipulation. He was about to discover that some principles couldn't be bought or threatened into submission. The quiet corporate plaza around me gave no hint of the chaos that would soon erupt, or the way my father's prejudices were about to collide with the harsh reality of what security professionals actually faced. Tuesday morning arrived with a phone call that shattered any remaining hope for a peaceful resolution. Gerald's voice on the other end carried a cold determination I'd never heard before. 24 hours are up, Roderick. What's your decision? I was getting ready for work, tying my tie in the bedroom mirror, while Sarah brushed her teeth in the bathroom. The normalcy of the moment made Gerald's ultimatum feel surreal. I told you yesterday. I'm not breaking up with Sarah, and I'm not apologizing for my career choices. Then you've chosen to lose your family. The finality in his voice should have warned me that something worse was coming, but I was too angry to read the signs properly. If that's how you want it, Gerald, that's how you want it. I'm just responding to your decision. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone with a mixture of relief and regret. At least the waiting was over. Gerald had made his position clear, and I'd made mine. Sarah emerged from the bathroom, concern creasing her forehead as she read my expression. He's cutting contact, I told her. Says I chose to lose my family. She wrapped her arms around me, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel the grief of that loss. Gerald and I had fundamental disagreements about values and priorities, but he was still my father. Losing that relationship hurt, even when I knew it was necessary. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. Don't be. This was his choice, not yours. I had no idea that Gerald had already moved beyond cutting contact into active sabotage. The first sign of escalation came during my morning security briefing at the corporate plaza. Frank Morrison's expression was grim as he handed me a formal written warning about unprofessional conduct and questionable judgment. This is going in your permanent file, Roderick. I've received additional complaints about your personal relationships affecting your work performance. Additional complaints from whom? Anonymous sources. People concerned about the security of our clients. Anonymous sources. Gerald's fingerprints were all over this, but proving it would be impossible. He'd found ways to apply pressure without directly exposing himself. Sir, my performance reviews speak for themselves. There's no evidence of unprofessional conduct. The evidence is the repeated concerns being raised by multiple parties. Where there's smoke, there's usually fire. Frank's reluctance to take stronger action suggested he didn't fully believe the complaints, but he couldn't ignore them either. Gerald had created enough doubt to damage my standing without providing Frank grounds to dismiss me outright. The morning patrol rounds felt different with the weight of formal discipline hanging over me. Every interaction with building tenants, Every decision about security protocols now carried extra scrutiny. Gerald had succeeded in making me constantly second-guess myself. Around 10:30, the real escalation began. I was monitoring the lobby security cameras when I spotted a familiar figure striding through the main entrance. Gerald Turner, wearing his most expensive suit and carrying the air of righteous authority that had intimidated me throughout childhood. But he wasn't alone. Uncle Robert walked beside him, looking uncomfortable but determined. Behind them, Cousin Marcus shifted nervously, clearly reluctant to be part of whatever Gerald had planned. They approached the security desk where I was stationed, and I could see several corporate executives in the lobby turning to watch the approaching confrontation. "Roderick," Gerald announced loudly enough for his voice to carry throughout the marble-floored space. "We need to talk." "I'm working, Gerald. If you want to discuss family matters, this is about family matters. It's about a young man who's throwing away his future and needs intervention from people who care about him." The lobby conversations gradually quieted as people realized they were witnessing a family drama. Mrs. Chen from the law firm on the 15th floor paused near the elevator bank, pretending to check her phone while listening. Two executives from the investment company stopped their conversation to watch. Uncle Robert stepped forward, his expression pained but resolute. "Roderick, your father asked us to come here because he's genuinely worried about your mental state." "My mental state?" Gerald seized control of the narrative. "You've become obsessed with this security job to an unhealthy degree. You're treating it like some kind of sacred calling, instead of temporary employment. You're refusing guidance from family members who have your best interests at heart." "Gerald, this isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," he interrupted. "This is where you spend your days playing security guard instead of building a real career. This is where you need to hear the truth about what you're doing to yourself." Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Roderick, maybe we should talk privately." "No," Gerald snapped. "Privacy is what allowed this situation to develop. Roderick needs to hear this from all of us, clearly and directly." He turned to address the growing audience of curious onlookers. "My son is having some personal difficulties. He's making choices that concern his family greatly. We're here to offer him help." The humiliation was expertly crafted. Gerald had turned my workplace into a stage for family intervention, painting himself as the concerned father and me as the unstable son who needed public correction. "You're either coming with us right now to discuss your future," Gerald continued, "or we're forced to consider more serious interventions, including psychiatric evaluation to determine if you're competent to make your own decisions." The threat hung in the air like a poison cloud. Gerald was suggesting that my refusal to follow his life plan was evidence of mental illness requiring professional treatment. "That's enough," I said, my voice cutting through the lobby noise. "You need to leave." "We're not leaving without you. You're clearly not thinking rationally about your situation." Frank Morrison appeared at my shoulder, having heard the commotion from his office. "Is there a problem here?" Gerald smiled his most charming business smile. "Frank Morrison? I'm Gerald Turner, Roderick's father. I think we spoke on the phone recently." Understanding dawned on Frank's face as he realized he was meeting the source of the anonymous complaints about my performance. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to take this discussion outside," Frank said diplomatically. "This is a workplace, not a family counseling center." "Of course," Gerald agreed readily. "We were just hoping to convince Roderick to join us for that discussion voluntarily. But if he's unwilling to listen to family concerns, well," he shrugged eloquently, letting the implication hang unspoken. Uncle Robert and Marcus looked deeply uncomfortable with Gerald's performance, but they'd been trapped in supporting roles by family loyalty and Gerald's manipulation. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said firmly. "If you want to discuss family matters, we can do it at an appropriate time and place." "Every time and place we've suggested has been inappropriate according to you," Gerald replied. "At what point do concerned family members have to take action to help someone who won't help himself?" The question was directed at Frank as much as me, suggesting that employer intervention might be necessary to address my supposed instability. Frank cleared his throat. "Mr. Turner, I understand family concerns, but this needs to happen off-site. Roderick, take 15 minutes to discuss this privately with your relatives. But keep it brief, and keep it civil. Gerald had achieved exactly what he wanted. Disruption of my work environment, public questioning of my stability, and official acknowledgement that family concerns were affecting my job performance. As they walked toward the lobby seating area, I noticed several building tenants watching with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. The scene had been witnessed by people I interacted with professionally every day, damaging my reputation in ways that would persist long after Gerald left. But the worst was yet to come. Gerald had one final card to play, and he was saving it for maximum impact. The 15-minute conversation was a rehash of familiar ultimatums, with Uncle Robert and Marcus reluctantly backing Gerald's position. When I refused to abandon my principles, Gerald played his ace. "You have a choice, Roderick. Come with us now for family counseling and career guidance, or we file papers with the county court requesting psychiatric evaluation. I have documentation of your obsessive behavior, your rejection of reasonable family guidance, and your inability to maintain stable employment relationships." The threat of forced psychiatric evaluation was Gerald's nuclear option. In his world of corporate power plays, he'd learned to use every available tool to achieve his objectives. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. I won't watch my son destroy his life without taking action." As they finally left the building, I realized that Gerald's campaign had moved beyond family pressure into legal territory. He was prepared to use court systems to force compliance with his vision of my future. Frank's expression when I returned to the security desk told me everything I needed to know about the damage that had been done. "That was your father?" he asked. "Unfortunately. He seemed genuinely concerned about your well-being." Gerald's performance had been perfectly calibrated to generate sympathy from observers while painting me as an unstable person who needed intervention. The fact that Frank was now questioning my judgment proved how effective the manipulation had been. As the day progressed, I realized that Gerald's next move would be his most aggressive yet. He demonstrated his willingness to destroy my professional reputation and threaten my personal freedom. I had no idea that within 24 hours, events would unfold that would force Gerald to confront the true nature of the work he'd spent so much energy disparaging. The corporate plaza around me felt tainted by the morning's humiliation, but it was still my responsibility to protect. Whatever Gerald planned next, I wouldn't abandon my duty to the people who counted on me to keep them safe. Wednesday morning brought an ominous quiet to the corporate plaza, the kind of stillness that made my military training prickle with unease. I'd arrived early for my shift, partly to avoid any surprise visits from Gerald, and partly because Detective Santos had called with an update on the surveillance activities she'd mentioned earlier. "We've identified at least 4 individuals conducting coordinated reconnaissance on downtown buildings," she'd told me. "FBI is now involved. They're taking this seriously." The federal involvement elevated the threat assessment considerably. I'd updated our security protocols, briefed the overnight team, and sent detailed reports to Frank Morrison. Whatever personal problems I had with Gerald, protecting the people in this building remained my primary responsibility. Sarah had texted me from the hospital where she was dealing with her own Gerald-induced crisis. "Administration wants to meet again today. Someone filed a formal complaint about my emotional instability, affecting patient safety." This is getting scary, Roderick. Gerald's campaign had expanded beyond threats into active sabotage of both our careers. He was systematically destroying our professional reputations to force compliance with his demands. Around 9:30, my phone rang with the call I'd been dreading. "Roderick, this is your last opportunity." Gerald's voice carried the cold finality of an ultimatum. "I'm driving to your building with the paperwork for psychiatric evaluation. You can come with me voluntarily for career counseling and family therapy, or I'm filing these papers with the court and having you committed for evaluation." The threat was real. Gerald had connections throughout the legal and medical communities. A successful businessman claiming his son was having a mental breakdown would be taken seriously by overworked court officials. "You're bluffing," I said, but uncertainty crept into my voice. "I'm 5 minutes away from your building. Uncle Robert and Cousin Marcus are with me as witnesses to your erratic behavior. We'll see how much of a bluff this is." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my security monitors while processing the reality of Gerald's escalation. He was actually going to attempt forced psychiatric commitment to break my will. My hands moved automatically through equipment checks and radio protocols while my mind raced through options. Gerald had trapped me between personal destruction and professional abandonment. He couldn't succeed with forced commitment, but the process would devastate my career and relationship with Sarah. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Gerald's threatened arrival didn't materialize, and I began to hope he'd reconsidered the nuclear option. Then Frank Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "All security personnel. This is control. We have multiple reports of suspicious activity in buildings A and C. Individuals with backpacks entering through different entrances. Implement Protocol 7 immediately." Protocol 7 was our highest alert level, reserved for potential terrorist activity. My blood went cold as Detective Santos's warnings crystallized into immediate danger. I grabbed my radio and emergency response kit, moving toward Building A's main entrance while coordinating with other security officers throughout the plaza. Years of military training and security experience kicked in, pushing Gerald's threats into background noise as real crisis demanded immediate response. "Control. This is Turner, in Building A lobby. I have visual on 3 individuals with large backpacks moving toward the elevator bank. Requesting immediate police backup. Police are en route, Turner. Maintain visual contact but do not approach suspects directly." The lobby suddenly erupted in chaos as fire alarms began blaring throughout the building. Emergency lights flashed red while automated announcements directed occupants toward evacuation routes. Through the main windows, I could see similar scenes playing out in buildings B and C. This wasn't a single incident but a coordinated attack on the entire corporate plaza. My radio buzzed with reports from other security officers. Multiple suspicious packages in Building B. Unidentified chemicals detected in Building C. Possible explosive devices confirmed. The realization hit me like ice water. This was the terrorist attack Detective Santos had been tracking, and it was happening right now, while Gerald was somewhere en route with his psychiatric commitment papers. "All security personnel. This is Detective Santos," the radio announced. "We have confirmed terrorist activity in progress. Federal response teams are 20 minutes out. Maintain evacuation procedures and provide tactical support as requested." 20 minutes felt like 20 hours when dealing with armed terrorists in a building full of innocent people. The federal response teams were trained for this, but they weren't here yet. The safety of over 800 corporate employees and retail workers depended on coordinated action from local police and private security. Through the lobby windows, I saw Gerald's luxury sedan pulling up to the police perimeter that was rapidly forming around the plaza. Even in the midst of a terrorist crisis, he was still coming to execute his threat against me. "Control. This is Turner. I need to coordinate with Building B security on evacuation routes for the executive floors." "Negative. Turner. All security personnel are to maintain positions and await federal tactical teams." But I could see people trapped on upper floors through the windows, employees who didn't understand the gravity of the situation and were failing to evacuate quickly enough. The building's public address system had malfunctioned, leaving many areas without clear emergency instructions. Military training doesn't leave you when civilian emergencies arise. The same instincts that had kept my unit alive overseas were screaming at me to take action rather than wait for backup that might arrive too late. "Control. I'm moving to assist with upper floor evacuations in Building A. People are trapped and need guidance to safe exits. Turner. Maintain your position. That's an order." Frank Morrison's voice carried genuine concern for my safety, but he wasn't seeing what I was seeing from ground level. The terrorists had chosen their timing perfectly, hitting during peak occupancy when maximum casualties were possible. Sarah's voice came through on my cell phone, calling from the hospital where she was monitoring emergency broadcasts. "Roderick, they're saying it's a major terrorist incident. Please tell me you're safe." "I'm safe. But there are people who won't be if someone doesn't help them evacuate properly. Don't do anything stupid. Wait for the professionals. I am a professional. The words came out with more conviction than I'd felt in days. Gerald's constant attacks on my career choice had made me doubt the value of my work, but crisis has a way of clarifying priorities. These people needed protection, and I had the training to provide it. Sarah, I love you. No matter what happens next, remember that I chose this because it's who I am. Roderick. I ended the call and moved toward the building's emergency stairwell, leaving behind the safety of the lobby for the unknown dangers of upper floors where terrorists might be positioning themselves for maximum devastation. As I climbed toward the sounds of panicking employees and potential violence, I had no idea that news cameras were already arriving outside, that my actions would soon be broadcast across the nation, or that Gerald was at that very moment watching his son disappear into mortal danger while clutching psychiatric commitment papers that suddenly seemed ridiculous in the face of real crisis. The corporate plaza had become a battleground, and everything Gerald had said about security work being unimportant was about to be tested against the harsh reality of terrorism in America. The emergency stairwell in Building A echoed with the sound of panicking employees trying to evacuate while emergency sirens wailed throughout the corporate plaza. My radio crackled with updates from Detective Santos and federal tactical teams converging on the scene. But I was focused entirely on reaching the upper floors where people remained trapped. Years of military training had taught me to compartmentalize fear and focus on mission objectives. Right now, the mission was clear: guide civilians to safety and gather intelligence on terrorist positions for the tactical teams that would soon arrive. 4th floor, southwest corner, my radio announced. Confirmed explosive device with timer mechanism. Bomb squad en route but civilians still in the area. I was climbing toward the 4th floor. The terrorist had positioned himself exactly where I was heading, and 23 employees from the accounting firm were trapped in offices beyond the device. Through the stairwell windows I could see news vans arriving at the police perimeter. Helicopter rotors thumped overhead as media and law enforcement aircraft circled the plaza. What had started as a local emergency was becoming a national news event. Building a security, this is federal command, came the authoritative voice through my radio. Identify yourself and report your position. This is Roderick Turner, Building A security supervisor. I'm in the emergency stairwell, approaching the 4th floor, where civilians are trapped near the explosive device. Turner, evacuate immediately. Federal tactical teams will handle civilian extraction. Sir, the tactical teams are 15 minutes out. These people don't have 15 minutes. The radio went silent for a moment before Detective Santos's voice came through. Roderick, this is Maria. I know you can handle yourself, but this is extremely dangerous. What's your assessment? Maria Santos understood that sometimes local responders had to act before federal backup arrived. Her question was really asking whether I had a viable plan, or was just charging into danger. Single perpetrator on 4, based on radio chatter. He's focused on the device timing, not watching his perimeter. I can reach the trapped civilians through the northern corridor while he's distracted. Federal command. This is Detective Santos. Local security has viable rescue plan for trapped civilians. Recommend allowing coordinated action. The federal response came grudgingly. Turner, you are authorized to attempt civilian extraction only. Do not engage the suspect directly. Report your movements continuously. I reached the 4th floor access door and paused to listen. Voices in panicked conversation came from the accounting offices down the hall. A man's voice, heavily accented, was shouting instructions about timer settings and device positioning. Through the door's small window, I could see him clearly for the first time. Mid-30s, dark hair, wearing a maintenance uniform that allowed him to move through the building without suspicion. The explosive device was a backpack, positioned near the elevator bank, with wires running to a digital timer showing less than 12 minutes remaining. 23 innocent people were going to die in 12 minutes, unless someone acted. The trapped employees were clustered in offices at the far end of the corridor, afraid to move toward the exits because they could see the terrorist and his device. They were following their instincts to hide rather than evacuate, but hiding wouldn't save them from the explosion. My military experience included urban combat situations where civilian protection required split-second decisions under extreme pressure. This terrorist had made a critical error by focusing on his device instead of securing his perimeter. Federal Command. This is Turner. I have visual on the suspect and explosive device. Timer shows 11 minutes 40 seconds. Trapped civilians are approximately 60 feet past the suspect's position. Turner. Maintain distance and wait for tactical team arrival. Sir, 11 minutes isn't enough time for federal backup to reach these people. I clipped the radio to my belt and drew the tactical baton that was part of my security equipment. It wasn't much against someone who might be armed with more than explosives, but it was what I had. The corridor layout worked in my favor. The terrorist was positioned near the elevator bank with his back partially turned toward the civilian area. If I could reach him quickly enough, I might be able to disable him before he could trigger the device manually or call for backup from other terrorists in the building. Moving with the stealth techniques that had kept me alive in Afghanistan, I slipped through the access door and began advancing along the wall. The terrorist was muttering to himself in what sounded like Arabic, checking connections on his device while consulting a printed diagram. 20 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet. He turned just as I reached striking distance, his eyes widening with shock and then rage as he realized his position was compromised. His hand moved toward what looked like a manual trigger device on his belt. The tactical baton caught him across the temple, with the full force of my military training behind it. He dropped instantly, the trigger device flying across the corridor as he collapsed beside his explosive device. Federal Command. Suspect is down. I shouted into my radio while moving quickly to secure the trigger device. Bomb timer shows 8 minutes 30 seconds. I need the bomb squad immediately. The trapped employees had heard the commotion and began emerging from their offices. 23 faces looking at me with a mixture of terror and hope as they realized someone had come to help them. Everyone moved toward the emergency stairs now, I directed them. Stay calm, move quickly, follow me to safety. As I guided the civilians toward evacuation routes, my radio exploded with activity. Federal tactical teams were coordinating with bomb disposal experts. Detective Santos was updating incident command, and somewhere in the background I could hear news anchors describing the unfolding crisis to television audiences. Turner, this is Federal Command. Outstanding work. Can you maintain position near the device until bomb squad arrives? Affirmative. Device appears stable, but timer is still running. What I didn't know was that news helicopters had captured the entire rescue on camera. Video of me disarming the terrorist and leading civilians to safety was already being broadcast live across national television networks. Outside the building, behind police barricades, Gerald Turner was watching his son's actions on the news feed being displayed on reporters' portable screens. The man who had spent days trying to force me to abandon security work was seeing exactly what that work really meant when lives hung in the balance. Federal Command, bomb squad has arrived. Timer now shows 3 minutes 40 seconds. Turner, evacuate immediately. You've done enough. As I moved toward the stairwell, following the last of the rescued civilians to safety, I had no idea that my actions were being praised by news anchors as heroic, that my name was trending on social media, or that Gerald's champagne glass was about to fall from nerveless fingers as he realized what he'd been trying to destroy. The corporate plaza was no longer just my workplace. It had become the stage where the value of security work was demonstrated in the most dramatic way possible, proving that sometimes the people society overlooks are the ones who stand between order and chaos. The aftermath of the terrorist attack unfolded like something from a movie I couldn't quite believe I was starring in. Federal agents swarmed the corporate plaza as bomb disposal experts successfully defused the device, with 97 seconds remaining on the timer. The 23 employees I'd rescued were safe, the terrorist was in custody, and coordinated arrests were happening at buildings B and C where other security professionals had prevented additional casualties. But I was lying on a stretcher in the back of an ambulance, being treated for a dislocated shoulder and minor cuts from the confrontation with the terrorist, when the true magnitude of what had happened began to register. Detective Maria Santos climbed into the ambulance beside me, her expression mixing professional respect with personal concern. "How are you feeling, hero?" "Like I got hit by a truck." "Is everyone okay?" "Everyone's fine, thanks to you. 23 people went home to their families tonight because you decided to act instead of wait." She paused, studying my face. "There's something else you need to know. The whole thing was broadcast live on national television. You're famous, Roderick." Famous. The word felt surreal as I processed what she was telling me. Through the ambulance windows, I could see news crews setting up for live broadcasts. Their cameras pointed toward the building where ordinary security work had suddenly become extraordinary heroism. "The networks are calling it the most dramatic civilian rescue of the year," Maria continued. "Your actions are being analyzed by terrorism experts on every major news channel." The president's office released a statement praising the professionalism and courage of local security personnel. My phone, somehow undamaged despite the day's chaos, began buzzing incessantly with calls and text messages. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. "Thank God you're okay." Her voice was thick with tears of relief and pride. I watched the whole thing on the hospital television. I've never been more proud of anyone in my life. "It was just my job, Sarah." "No, it wasn't just your job. It was you choosing to risk everything to save people you'd never met. It was you proving that what we do matters more than anyone realizes." As the paramedics finished their examination and cleared me for release, I became aware of a commotion outside the ambulance. Voices raised in argument, someone shouting my name with desperate urgency. Through the back windows, I could see Gerald pushing against police barriers, trying to reach the ambulance where I was being treated. His expensive suit was disheveled, his usually perfect hair messed, and his face carried an expression I'd never seen before, raw terror mixed with shame. "That's my son," he was shouting at the police officers blocking his path. "I need to see my son." Detective Santos followed my gaze. "Your father's been out there since the first news reports started broadcasting. He looks like he's seen a ghost." The irony wasn't lost on me. Gerald had come to the plaza with psychiatric commitment papers, planning to have me forcibly evaluated for the crime of choosing security work over corporate ambitions. Instead, he'd watched his son risk his life doing the job Gerald considered beneath notice. "Can you ask them to let him through?" I requested. Maria stepped out of the ambulance and spoke briefly with the officers at the perimeter. Moments later, Gerald was hurrying toward me with Uncle Robert and Cousin Marcus close behind. The man who approached the ambulance bore little resemblance to the confident executive who'd humiliated me at wedding receptions and threatened my career. Gerald's face was pale, his hands shaking as he reached toward me and then stopped, uncertain of his welcome. "Roderick, I." His voice cracked, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw my father cry. "I watched it on the news. I watched you save those people. Gerald." I was wrong. The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for hours. I was wrong about everything. About your work, about Sarah, about what makes a man valuable in this world. Uncle Robert and Marcus stood behind him, their own expressions carrying mixtures of shame and amazement. They'd participated in Gerald's campaign against my career, and now they were seeing its true worth displayed on national television. "I brought papers to have you committed," Gerald continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was going to force you into psychiatric evaluation because you wouldn't abandon security work." He pulled folded documents from his jacket pocket and held them up. "I was going to destroy your life because you chose to protect people instead of making money." The confession hung between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. Gerald had revealed the depths of his manipulation while simultaneously witnessing its complete moral bankruptcy. "But then I saw the news coverage," he went on. "I saw you disappear into that building while terrorists were inside. I saw you risk everything for strangers who probably don't even know your name. I realized that while I was trying to destroy your career, you were living up to principles I'd never understood." A crowd was gathering around the ambulance, as word spread that the hero of the terrorist incident was meeting with his family. News cameras focused on our conversation, while social media exploded with praise for both my actions and Gerald's public admission of error. "Mr. Turner," a reporter called out, "can you comment on your son's heroic actions today?" Gerald turned toward the cameras with the same commanding presence he'd always displayed in business settings, but now it served a completely different purpose. "My son is a hero," he announced clearly. "Not just today, but every day. He's chosen to protect others, instead of pursuing personal gain. I spent weeks trying to convince him to abandon security work because I didn't understand its importance. Today I learned that, while I was focused on profit margins, he was preparing for the day when someone's life would depend on his courage." The crowd of reporters and onlookers erupted with questions and camera flashes, but Gerald wasn't finished. "I want to publicly apologize to my son and to Sarah Chen, his girlfriend, who also works in security at Regional Medical Center. I attempted to damage both their professional reputations because I was too arrogant to recognize the value of their service. They represent the best of American values: service before self, protection of the innocent, courage in the face of danger." Uncle Robert stepped forward to address the cameras. "Our entire family owes Roderick an apology. We allowed ourselves to judge his choices based on social prejudice rather than moral worth. Today we learned the difference between making money and making a difference." As the media attention swirled around us, I realized that Gerald's public confession was having consequences beyond family reconciliation. His corporate board would be watching this coverage, seeing their senior executive admit to months of harassment against security professionals who'd just prevented a terrorist attack. By the next morning, news reports confirmed that Gerald had submitted his resignation from Turner Financial rather than face formal removal by the board of directors. The man who'd built his identity around corporate success had lost that foundation in a single afternoon. But something remarkable happened in the days that followed. Instead of retreating into bitterness, Gerald threw himself into supporting the security professionals he'd spent so much energy disparaging. Within a week, he'd established the Turner Foundation for First Responder Support, using his personal wealth and business connections to provide training scholarships and equipment grants for security, police, and emergency medical personnel. "I need to make amends," he told me during our first real conversation since the terrorist attack. "I need to prove that I learned something from watching my son risk his life while I was planning to destroy it." Sarah and I were married 6 months later, in a ceremony that Gerald helped plan and proudly hosted. His introduction of Sarah to wedding guests bore no resemblance to his previous dismissive comments about security guards. "Sarah Chen," he announced to the assembled family and friends, "is one of the finest people I've ever met. She dedicates her life to protecting patients and medical staff, often facing dangerous situations with courage and professionalism. My son is fortunate to have found someone who shares his commitment to serving others." The corporate plaza, where I'd faced down terrorists, became the headquarters for my new position as regional security director, overseeing safety operations for major commercial properties throughout the state. Sarah was promoted to chief of hospital security, recognition for her leadership during several crisis situations that tested her skills and judgment. Gerald's foundation grew into a major force in supporting first responder training and equipment needs. He traveled the country speaking to business groups about the importance of recognizing and supporting security professionals, using his own experience as an example of how easily social prejudice could blind people to essential services. "I almost destroyed the best thing in my life," he would tell audiences, "because I confused social status with human value. My son taught me that true success isn't measured by bank accounts or job titles, but by the willingness to put others before yourself when it matters most." The news coverage from that day became a permanent reminder of how quickly circumstances can reveal character. Video of my confrontation with the terrorist was used in training programs for security professionals across the country, but it was Gerald's public confession and transformation that carried the deeper lesson about family, prejudice, and redemption. Uncle Robert and Cousin Marcus both became strong supporters of the Foundation's work, using their own business connections to expand support for first responder programs. The family that had almost fractured over career prejudices became united around a mission of service and support for those who protect others. Detective Maria Santos often spoke at the Foundation's training conferences, sharing insights about cooperation between law enforcement and private security. The best responses to crisis situations happen when everyone understands that protection is a shared responsibility, she would explain. It doesn't matter what uniform you wear or who signs your paycheck. What matters is your commitment to keeping people safe. As I reflect on the journey from wedding humiliation to terrorist response, I'm struck by how completely Gerald's perspective transformed. The man who once dismissed security work as beneath notice became one of its most passionate advocates, using his influence and resources to support the very profession he'd tried to force me to abandon. The evening news still occasionally shows footage from that day at the corporate plaza, usually during stories about terrorism prevention or first responder heroism. But for me, the most important outcome wasn't the national recognition or career advancement. It was watching my father discover that his son's choices weren't failures of ambition but expressions of principle. Gerald learned that true worth isn't determined by social status or financial success, but by the courage to act when others are in danger. He discovered that the security professionals he'd looked down upon were the people who stood between order and chaos, between safety and tragedy. Most importantly, he realized that love means supporting the people you care about in pursuing their calling, even when that calling doesn't match your own vision of success. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is the humility to admit they were wrong and the wisdom to learn from their children. Now, as Sarah and I build our life together with Gerald's full support and blessing, we're surrounded by a family that understands the value of service above self. The Foundation continues growing, supporting thousands of security professionals and first responders who protect their communities every day. And Gerald never misses an opportunity to introduce us with pride, telling anyone who'll listen about his son and daughter-in-law who chose careers dedicated to protecting others. The man who once saw only social status now sees moral courage, and he's never been prouder of his family. The terrorist attack taught us all that in moments of real crisis, what matters isn't your job title or bank account balance. What matters is your willingness to risk everything for people you've never met, simply because protecting others is the right thing to do. That's a lesson worth learning, worth sharing, and worth living by every single day. Have you ever had to stand up for something important despite pressure from people who should have supported you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video if you believe that true worth comes from serving others. Subscribe for more stories about courage and redemption, and share this with anyone who needs to remember that every honest job has dignity and value. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the most important victories happen when we choose principles over popularity. Your support means everything, and I hope this story reminds you that heroes come in all forms, including the ones wearing uniforms that others might overlook.